and the discovery of the vaccines occurred during my youth.
Uh-huh.
And I think that many people prayed to God for some cure.
Right.
So to me, I give those kind of things, those kinds of discoveries up to God.
Okay.
So,
But let me ask this question maybe a different way. How do we find God in what we do know? Yeah.
Just acknowledge him in everyday life. I mean, just the world around you, the blessings you have every day. He's part of that too. He's the reason we have families and, a beautiful day like today. Things like that. He's everywhere.
So in gratitude and appreciation, we can acknowledge God for what we do have and what we do know in daily life. Very good. What else?
Well, my wife has a tattoo on her, or a Jewish star, Emmanuel, God with us.
Yes.
I like to actually make it more personal. God with me.
Yes.
And
Right.
I walk in that. I think it's something a person has to struggle with on a daily basis.
Right.
How do I walk with God, or how does He walk with me?
Right. Right.
God with us, Emmanuel.
Right. Very good. So those are both good examples. I would just add a third. In scientific discovery, why can't science be an enterprise whereby we learn to appreciate the wonder of God in what we come to know scientifically, instead of simply using God for what we haven't yet come to know? You see the difference? I teach at a Jesuit university, and the Jesuits historically have been very much a part of the scientific discussion and conversation, because they argue science helps us plumb the mystery of creation, where at its depth we experience the wonder of God. So there's a way of talking about how even scientific advance and knowledge can be a way of accessing the beyond in the midst of life. So in all three of these examples, we're talking about, I think, the kind of view of God that Bonhoeffer is after. Not simply calling upon God when we are in need. And we all know how much this happens. When people who otherwise find themselves completely distant from Christianity, suddenly at the end of their life become religious. Now, this is not to say that God isn't working in their lives, perhaps. But at its worst, this could be an example of what Bonhoeffer is talking about. When people encounter the limit situation of death, suddenly they come to God. What Bonhoeffer is trying to say is, we shouldn't use God that way. Instead, we should be seeking to discover God in the midst of what we know and in the midst of our lives, not just on the edge of our life and not just as a stopgap for what we don't know. So that's his critique of the God of the gaps. That's what it means. That is to say, he wants to find a different understanding of God than just the view that uses God to fill in the lack of scientific knowledge or to address God only when we need God. Incidentally, the word transcendence, that means to climb over or rise above. So when he says the transcendence of theory based on perception has nothing to do with the transcendence of God. So he's not saying that, he's not talking about what's beyond our knowledge. He's talking about a reality that is beyond simply what we see perhaps at the depth of life. That's an important distinction first. Secondly, this reference to the Deus ex machina, that's Latin for, as this table and I was discussing, the God of the machine. And what that means, he's referring to a custom in ancient Greek plays, where at the end of the play, there would be people who would lower a god onto the stage, whose task it was to wrap up all the loose ends of the play. And he's saying, we use God that way. We lower God down only when we need God to wrap up the loose ends of our life. But why not instead seek God in the midst of our life, instead of simply lowering God down just when we need Him? All right, that's one, yes?
My parents were products of Jesuit universities.
Great.
And, there's, I don't know if this is applicable, but it comes to mind the constant argument between, about evolution. And as a child, my brothers and I were taught that, we were taught evolution, but we were also taught that God is a part of that process. And so I never had a problem with it.
Right. Do you know how many debates we have about creationism at
Oh,
the
yeah.
university?
It
No,
goes
just
on
at the university, how many debates we have? Zero.
Oh, really?
Zero. It's a Jesuit school.
Yeah.
And so it confirms the experience that you're telling us about now.
Mhm.
It's not a school where we see the necessity of debating faith and, in this case, reason or science. The Jesuits historically have come to a perspective where the two go together. Science can be a way of cultivating our sense of the mystery and wonder of the universe, which we as Christians call God. Yeah. So I think the example you're giving is a nice illustration that conforms with what Bonhoeffer is saying here. And Metaxas doesn't like this. He doesn't really, well, I shouldn't say Metaxas, I'm going off of memory here. But a lot of evangelicals who read Bonhoeffer don't like knowing that Bonhoeffer accepted evolution. They don't like that about Bonhoeffer. But I think what Bonhoeffer would say, I'm guessing here, is that the moment we start getting caught up in saying how God, and pitting God against science this way, is the moment we're moving to a kind of reactionary position that isn't taking seriously a world come of age. So what the Jesuits have done, at least many of them, is learn to recognize the presence of God in, with, through, and under the evolutionary process. And some of them, including a famous Jesuit by the name of Teilhard de Chardin, argue that this is the way God is moving creation toward what he calls Christogenesis, where, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, God in Christ will become all in all. That is the culmination of the evolutionary process. And Christ himself is the apex of the evolutionary process, insofar as he discloses to us a way of being that is absolutely open to the transcendent. Not the beyond above, but the beyond in the midst of life. So your experience seems to work with Bonhoeffer here very well.
It certainly has worked in my life.
Yeah.
What you just explained
Yeah.
seems to me to be heaven. That
Yeah,
open.
we should do another series. Is your pastor taking note of this? The adult ed community. I think it'd be fascinating to do a series on theistic evolution. And to talk about how theologians in the modern period have really tried to examine how an evolutionary perspective and a faith perspective can actually work together. One of my favorite examples of this is evident in the writings of Walter Rauschenbusch, a famous early 20th century theologian. He says evolution confirms the doctrine of original sin. How so? Because according to evolutionary theory, human beings are fundamentally out for themselves. They're selfish for the sake of survival. We are born that way into the world. Guess what original sin teaches? We are born selfish into the world. And it is by grace that we become, as Bonhoeffer says, men and women for others. And this is born out of the evolutionary process. So there's a fascinating way, historically, theologians, of bringing these teachings together, which is interesting to me because original sin is a conservative doctrine. And yet the argument is that original sin is actually confirmed by evolutionary theory. So we'll come back to that another time.
So Dr. Danner, is this
Yes.
spot available right after Easter if you were interested?
Okay, very good. Very good. All right, I ended. Let's talk next about a world come of age. What does that mean? Now, to make this a little easier, let me just ask you what the phrase come of age means in ordinary usage.
Become an adult.
Becoming an adult. So what do you think Bonhoeffer is saying here? The world has grown up. And how does it think it has grown up? Notice the way I just said that. How does it think it has grown up?
By filling in the gaps. Then we have answers.
That we have answers, that we have gaps, and that we no longer need what? God. Now think about this. How many of your friends are not in church this morning? And why aren't they in church? Well, I don't need God. I'm already a good person. That would be an expression of a world come of age. So when Bonhoeffer's writing about that here, what does he say? Man has learned to cope with all questions of importance without recourse to God as a working hypothesis. Wow. That's language that he's drawing from a famous French scientist of the late 18th and early 19th century. I have no need for the God hypothesis, this scientist told Napoleon, in my understanding of the universe. As in the scientific field, so in human affairs generally, what we call God, and notice that he's putting God here in quotation marks, because he's suggesting perhaps that this is not the true God, What we call God is being more and more edged out of life, losing more and more ground. Efforts are made to prove to a world thus come of age, a world that has grown up, a world that sees itself as autonomous, as self-sufficient. Efforts are being made to prove to a world thus come of age, that it cannot live without the tutelage of God. Yes, you think you're grown up, but you still need God. You still need God to answer the questions you can't answer yourself. That would be an example of using God as a stopgap in a world come of age. Yet the ordinary man who spends his everyday life at work and with his family and, of course, with all kinds of hobbies and other interests is not affected. So, to summarize, what's he saying there? People in our world live as though God is no longer necessary. And telling people God is, by convincing them that they need to rely on God in the ways he's already mentioned, is perhaps not the way to respond. So when he's talking about a world come of age, he's talking about living in a context where Western secular society expresses the attitude that it no longer needs God. We can get along just fine ourselves. The world thinks it is grown up. And the question for us then is, how do we reach people in a world come of age in an authentic way? And that takes us to the third point of Bonhoeffer. What should we not do? What should we not do? How does Bonhoeffer help us understand first how not to respond?
Don't preach God, be done. Be an example.
Yes, okay, now you've already anticipated where we're going next week. That's very good. That's very good. How about here? How about here? And that's really good, because that is part of where we're going. I don't want to give away the surprise, but that's part of where we're going. He says the attack by Christian apologetic. What does apologetic mean? Defense of, perfect. So in this context, it doesn't mean saying sorry for your faith. It means finding ways to defend your faith or to give an account of your faith. Upon the adulthood of the world, so there's this reference to a world come of age, I consider to be in the first place, wow, listen to this, pointless. In the second, ignoble. And in the third, unchristian. So what does he mean? Well, remember, can you imagine this? Bonhoeffer is scribbling this in a Nazi prison cell, trying to get these ideas out. And this is what he scribbles. Pointless, that's why some of these sentences are incomplete. Pointless, it's not that he writes the way Rob Bell does. Rob Bell intentionally writes using sentence fragments, and it just kills me every time. I think he's an interesting guy, but please complete your sentences. Pointless because it looks to me like an attempt to put a grown-up man back into adolescence, i.e. to make him dependent on things on which he is not, is not in fact, here I am criticizing Rob Bell, there's a typo, is not in fact dependent anymore. So don't tell people they need to become like children in order to be faithful before God. And don't proof text biblical passages to support your view. If you want a biblical passage to support what you're thinking here, what Bonhoeffer's thinking, think of the words of the Apostle Paul. When I was a child, I thought like a child, but no longer am I a child, I'm an adult. What we need, Bonhoeffer seems to be suggesting, is a Christianity that meets people as adults in a world come of age. Don't suggest to them that they need to become again like adolescents. Ignoble, he says, secondly, because this amounts to an effort to exploit the weakness of man for purposes alien to him and not freely subscribed to by him. How many of you have seen the movie God Is Not Dead? Anybody? You didn't miss anything. I don't know if you saw it, but it's one of my least favorite movies of the year. If you want to see a great Christian movie, watch the movie Calvary. That's a powerful film. But in God Is Not Dead, the whole point is to convince an atheist philosophy professor, no stereotypes there, the whole point is to convince him, as he is dying, that he really needed to accept Christ. And what Bonhoeffer is saying here is that that method exploits a human being in moments of weakness. That is not how we want to reach people when it comes to sharing our Christian faith. We want to find people not only in weakness, but also in strength and vitality. So don't exploit people in weakness for the sake of sharing the Christian message. And finally, unchristian, he says, because for Christ himself is being substituted one particular stage in the religiousness of man, i.e. a human law. What does that mean? What is the most important word in classical Protestant Christianity? Most important word of your faith, I'm guessing, is Lutheran. Grace. And what does grace mean? That before God, you have to do nothing to be accepted by God. When Bonhoeffer talks here about a law or a work, he's talking about something that is expected of us in order to make us right with God. So if you think about it this way, well, I don't believe in evolution because I'm Christian. That is substituting a law for faith. In other words, the condition for being Christian and accepted by God is that I reject evolutionary theory. Well, I don't think rejecting evolution makes you a Christian. I think it makes you slightly uninformed. I think what he's suggesting here is that whenever we think to ourselves, I must perform this intellectual good work, what he's suggesting is we have undermined the message of grace, which is central to our Christianity. In other words, you don't have to subscribe to a particular theological, philosophical, or scientific perspective in order to be accepted by God. You certainly don't have to regress and deny contemporary science for the sake of being acceptable to God. That is substituting a law for grace. And you'll recall this is the same maneuver Bonhoeffer took when he was arguing against the German Christians who passed the Arian Clause, which once again substituted a law for grace. That law, you must not, if you are to be a Christian pastor, you must not be of Jewish descent. That is stipulating a condition for church membership, just as this is stipulating a condition for faith. And Bonhoeffer says no to those in the name of grace. So, of this more later, which is our key, if you turn the worksheet back over, you should now have a clearer sense of what he means by the God of the stopgaps. That is to say, using God to fill in our lack of knowledge or only in times of need. You should have a sense of what he means by a world come of age, that is a world that sees itself as autonomous, that understands itself in terms of self-sufficiency, no longer needing God, at least God in quotation marks. And finally, you can see what he suggests in terms of what we should not do. We should not tell people to be children in order to be accepted by God. We should not compel people to regress developmentally or in terms of their knowledge in order to be Christian. We need to meet people where they are. And where are they? Adults. When I was a child, I thought like a child. But as Paul says again in 1 Corinthians 13, I am no longer a child. I am an adult. Can we meet people there? That's Bonhoeffer's question. His answer is next week. But as we conclude, I'd like to ask you two questions, or one final question by way of reflection. What is your reaction today to Bonhoeffer's view? Is the Pacific Northwest a region of the U.S. come of age?
Yes.
Yes, it is. All right. Can you give me an example of that?
And we're one of the biggest non-Christian areas there are.
That's correct. Scholars call ours the nun zone. When it comes to religious affiliation in this country, more people in the Pacific Northwest than any other, although I'm understanding Maine is now the top contender here, than most any other region of the country identify as none when it comes to religious affiliation. So we are the nun zone. We are the nun zone. And in many ways, we can probably argue that our secular context shares a little in common with Bonhoeffer's understanding of the world come of age, which makes him especially relevant for us. What else?
I tend to wonder how closely that correlates with the level of education or the basis of science. Because I've got some atheist friends on Facebook who like to throw out all these names of these prolific top names in
Sure.
science. that also believe the same way. But that sort of leads me to his point about the world coming of age. That position seems to suggest that problem, that issue is going to just get tougher and tougher as we keep going.
It might, and we have to ask ourselves, and that's the reason that I put God in quotation marks, and Bonhoeffer does as well. We have to ask ourselves which God they are dismissing, and whether or not that is the God we worship in the Christian faith. That's the big question here. In other words, are these critics of the Christian God, in fact, attacking the strong one? An understanding of God to which we as Christians do not subscribe. And that's going to be a key part of Bonhoeffer's response next class. So last item on your worksheet, TINW, which means tune in next week. A new Christianity, or how will Bonhoeffer get us out of this one? See you next Sunday.